and welcome to this discussion on philanthropy, impact investing and family dynamics. I'm joined today by an expert panel from across the pond, from New York and London, who are going to bring you some excellent insights from this fascinating area of private wealth management. Delighted to be bringing you this in partnership with Philanthropy Impact. This session is a brainchild of myself and Zofia, who I'm going to come and chat with in a sec. As always with PCD content, we love to hear from our audience. Put any comments you have in the chat. All our audience live on YouTube, please do get involved. Let us know what you're thinking as we move through this fascinating discussion. I will bring any comments or questions or thoughts to our panelists live as we move through this session. So we do want to make this as interactive as possible. But just before we get into the meat of the discussion, I'm just going to come to Zofia first from Philanthropy Impact. Welcome, Zofia.
Hi, David.
So it's great to have you on today. We hatched this plan to create this panel supergroup, if you like, parts of PCD membership with Pierre and Rennie and George from your side, because it's such an important, it's something that we're passionate about educating advisors on. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your work at Philanthropy Impact and the educational work that you do with private wealth advisors. Well,
thank you for having us. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited to do this event. So Philanthropy Impact, we're a membership organisation with the vision of a world where wealthy individuals and families engage in philanthropy, in social investment, and also impact ESG, sustainable investment, supported by their trusted professional advisors. So our focus is on increasing and improving the flow of capital for good, both socially and environmentally. And we work to build the will and capacity of professional advisors, so that's investment and financial planners, private client advisors, wealth managers, tax, legal, all across the board. And we work with them to support their ultra and high net worth private clients on their philanthropy and their social impact journeys. And also purpose-driven wealth strategies. There's lots of different ways that it's said these days. And we work to educate, as you said, via webinars, live events, online publications, and also specific CPD accredited training on the intricacies of strategic philanthropy, social investment, impact investment, as well as trends and innovations in the sector, and more practical solutions for clients on their purpose-driven journeys.
Wonderful. And the confidence that is built through training makes more of these conversations tabled by advisors to their clients. Is that your experience? Is that you give the advisor the toolkit to actually confidently raise these issues so that it's not just an adjunct, but it can be a core part of the relationship they have with their wealth manager? Do you find that when people come through your training, they grow in confidence and do start to discuss this in more detail with their clients?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest feedbacks we get, is this idea of empowerment. I feel empowered. So I think there's several reasons why people who are advisors won't engage in these conversations. There's lots of different reasons, and it will be very individual to them. But one of the things that we try to teach here is that you don't have to be an expert in philanthropy or social investment, but you need to understand what it is that you do know and where you can go and find out what you don't know. And our training sessions also focuses on the commercial aspects of why it's good to offer this advice. I think that can also be a blocker, the idea that there is no money to be made in philanthropy and impact investing, which is a myth, and we blast that myth out of the water, as you'll probably hear from George and Rennie.
Yes, it would be great to bring in George King, actually, from Maseco on that point. George, you're an experienced private wealth advisor. You're passionate about this area. How have you seen it benefit yourself personally and your business through tabling these discussions with high net worth clients?
Thanks for that, David. And I'll pick up first, I think, on a concept that Zofia was leaving with, which is the benefit is sometimes hard to measure, which doesn't mean it isn't there. If you think about the wealth management business, most of the benefit that you ultimately get from clients is time. It's trust. It's things that are hard to measure at the outset. And the way that you ultimately get to that kind of point is this sort of cliched phrase of becoming a trusted advisor. What does that actually mean? That means you're actually standing in the shoes of the client. That means you're not there to sell, you're there to ask. And ultimately, the fundamental question that, frankly, all wealth advisors need to ask people of wealth that they're advising is, what's this money for? And then you need to then delve into that. And some of it is investing, and some of it is about inheritance, and some of it is about what have you. But if you then aren't equipped to respond to the answer to that question when it has to do with the allocation of capital along the lines of someone's values, whether that's philanthropy, whether that's impact investing, a whole spectrum of areas where you're allocating capital along a client's values, if you're completely unequipped to respond to that answer, this is what my wealth is for, you're really just not a fully capable wealth advisor, right? That's where the journey really starts.
And have you seen the benefit in being part of the philanthropy impact community in your relationships with other intermediaries, identifying and partnering with other parts of the sector who are also passionate and engaged and pulling in the same direction?
I'm really glad you asked that because, and Zofia mentioned this also, this is not about pretending to be an expert on things that you know a little bit about. It's making sure that you understand enough about them to ask the right questions, to have built networks of resources, people, other types of tools, and then be able to thoughtfully engage in a conversation with people of wealth, clients and potential clients about this whole topic. As a quick example, I'm going through this journey right now, right? I have a client that's been a client for many, many years. They're generating wealth more than they will spend in their lifetime. The first conversation you have with them is always, what do I do with this money? And the second conversation at some point in the relationship is about, oh my gosh, you have more money than you're going to spend in your lifetime, and you have inheritance tax conversations and so forth. In the midst of that, if you aren't then talking about things like philanthropy and what else to do with this money, having an incomplete conversation. And so that journey starts very softly. It's not a moral question like, what are you doing with your money? Aren't you trying to give it away? Right? You have to be very delicate about this. It's not about imposing values, but it's about unearthing values and helping them express it. So we've been through a months-long process of, soundbite by soundbite, piece by piece, just talking about philanthropy, talking about the interaction between investment and ESG and sustainable investing. Then there'd be another session about different ways of actually giving money away. What are the tools? What are the structures? What's the foundation? What is a donor advised fund? What are these things? And over the course of months of slowly introducing topics, you start to work through this. What are the things you've given to in the past? $5. What might it have been and why? Was it because you felt passionately about it? Was it a pull the money out of you? Was it something you felt guilty about? Was it kind of a push? Just starting all those conversations and that journey, the link that creates between you and the client is enduring. And ultimately, you end up looking at the entire wealth picture. That's the foundation for being that trusted advisor. It's not just the piece that you actually deal with as a lawyer or an accountant, or in my case, as a wealth manager, but looking at that whole picture and then using those external resources to bring them to bear.
Thank you. Zofia, do you find that there's certain parts of the wealth sector that are stronger at these conversations than others? Are the lawyers or the accountants or the wealth managers ahead in terms of their knowledge and confidence with these topics, or is it fairly equal? What's your view on the professionals in the sector?
I couldn't possibly say. I would say that there's private banks who have philanthropy advisors in-house. So the likes of Hoare and Co, that's Rennie, and Barclays and UBS, they already have their philanthropic offering within their teams. They also have their impact investment arms now. So I think that they probably are a little bit ahead in this because they understand that it's needed to keep clients, to retain clients in that way. And I think, the majority of people coming on our training, I would say, is the private client lawyers who are trying to understand. They work often with family wealth, with succession planning, and looking at legacies and things, and involving children in the debates around wealth and trying to teach the children about wealth. And they use philanthropy in that way. So I think they're trying to understand a bit better how to begin the conversation and actually actively try to encourage philanthropy without it being impertinent, I suppose.
If I may, David, I just want to add, it's not just about what you gain, it's also what you risk losing. Right? So if you aren't having this conversation, someone else eventually will. So you're going to lose this client that cares about this topic that you don't raise and engage with in a comprehensive way. If this is important to your client and you can't deal with it and you never talk about it, you're just going to lose that client at some point. So it's not just what you gain, it's what you lose. And it's intergenerational wealth transfer. So, the next gen is much more into this. So even if you don't think your current client cares, their kids likely care. And so if you aren't engaging in this topic, if you aren't forming the bridge yourself between sort of the old money and the inheritors of money and the difference in values they have and helping to bridge those conversations, you're likely going to see not just a conversation about what you don't get, but it's what walks out the door.
George, I'll take it even further, if I may interject. This is Pierre. That same engagement, that same conversation is how you as a family member can ensure a much greater benefit to the philanthropies, the charities you care about. And it's hard to do, but that engagement, that discussion, that bringing your entire family into the decisions and the actual giving and the implementation of and the following up on, that's where the greatest success is created. And if you don't do that up front, you're going to miss a huge opportunity to bring a better benefit to those communities, those philanthropies, those people you care about.
Thank you, Pierre. Zofia and George, thank you for getting the conversation underway. I'm just going to take a step back, Pierre, and actually just come back to ask you, it'd be great to hear, before we get into the full meat of the conversation with yourself and Rennie, just a tiny bit about your background, but also just where your passion for this area comes from. Did you have a kind of light bulb moment where you became much more passionate and interested in this, or did your interest in this whole area build over time?
Sure. Well, I was quite fortunate to be born into my mother's family, which has a now 100-year business that's become a very, very large retail chain here. But more relevant to this discussion, several philanthropic endeavors that go back now 170 years in one case that the family has been involved in, and then actually several much more recent ones that are having a huge impact. And there has been opportunity for family engagement through those. And similarly, being fortunate to be born into my father's family, who have had a business for now 200 years, but have created a whole series of major philanthropies over the years that are bringing great benefit to particular communities that need it. And again, each have had maybe more in the beginning than now that they are big multi-billion-dollar enterprises with hundreds of employees, opportunities for family engagement. And that to me that's actually what triggered that was the passion, if you will, that triggered what I do today, which is more in the more general family office services, but really helping people to live wisely with their wealth. Philanthropy is a huge opportunity to do what, for me, is the most important shtick of all, which is you have to have family engagement. You have to communicate well within the family, whether it's about the wealth itself or about the charitable endeavor or about the business or about the governance or about everything. You have to have that. And that really caused me about 10 years ago to say, look, let's take a new path in my life and start proselytizing on this very topic. And philanthropy and charitable giving is probably the biggest single piece within that, as an opportunity to get family to talk well together and to therefore be more effective in everything they do. And most importantly, to keep that family cohesion together across 50 to 100 years so that those distant future descendants can take a benefit from the success their ancestors had, a benefit that's not just about money and getting into the right college or driving, definitely not about driving a Ferrari, but a more well-rounded benefit to those distant future descendants.
Thank you, and we'll come back to that very topic. But first of all, I just want to come to Rennie Hoare, just to also pose the same question, Rennie, to ask you about, just to give us a sense of your background experience here, but also your passion for this area and how that developed. Was it a big bang moment, or was it something that just built over time?
Thank you, David. I think for me, philanthropy actually, it's the whole family were dip-dyed in it. It's there right from birth, and it's not a new creation. So when thinking about the Hoare family, so C. Hoare & Co, the private bank, this year we're celebrating its 350th year anniversary. And looking back through time, there have been 50 partners of the bank, so family members who've worked for the organisation through those 350 years. When trying to look at what makes a successful family member, what makes a successful partner, very frequently there is a huge amount of philanthropy, thinking about other stakeholders in society. And there are some excellent examples right from the very early beginnings of the bank of catalytic, innovative philanthropy, of using resources to try to find new ways of doing things, from setting up Westminster Hospital to setting up the very first hospice in the UK, which has become Royal Trinity Hospice in the 1800s, all the way through to trying to experiment and do things now with charities. And this thing for the family, it's probably very easy to say philanthropy is important, but I feel that backing it up with actions is critical. So there are 7 of us partners who are the 100% owners of the business, and we've committed to giving up to 10% of the bank's profits each year to charity. And so that thing of not just talking about it, but actually making sure that you walk the walk is critical. The reason why that then becomes imbued in the whole family is we then use philanthropy much more broadly to bind the family together. We have this charitable trust now called the Golden Bottle Trust, and we use that to just imbue the right culture and values in the widest cohort of the Hoare family. So the founder of the bank and his wife had 17 children. So obviously lockdown wouldn't have been great for them if they're having to go through that. But you play 17 children forwards through time of 350 years. There are now 2,400 living direct descendants of the founder of the bank. And any one of them is able to apply for a grant of up to £5,000 for a charity that they're very involved with. We almost see it as a way of doing venture philanthropy, where you've got resources and money allocated. But in doing that, it gives that idea of this is what it means to be part of the Hoare family. To be involved in philanthropy is central to what we do. And so right from as soon as I could chat with things, my dad was chatting charity and philanthropy with me, and it's very exciting to be able to take that into the workplace as well.
So the central point of cohesion for families, having clear communication and this kind of using philanthropy to bind the family together, it seems to be something clear between both you and Pierre, Rennie. Is that fair to say?
I think absolutely. And also it allows you to flesh out and have types of discussions that are very difficult to come to in any other direction. And I think it also slightly circles back to George's point around why philanthropy is such an important thing for advisors to be able to get their head round and feel confident in. I think if I look across the financial services landscape, there's a lot of disintermediation by technology.
Mm.
And that is done where there aren't strong enough links between the client or customer and the incumbent organization. One of the things that can be done to counteract that is forming very strong human-to-human connections. And a discussion about philanthropy is a discussion not just about where money can be allocated, it's about what you care about, what your passions are, what you're trying to achieve. And so being able to have that just puts a completely different dimension in that advisor to client or customer relationship, and hopefully puts the chance of disintermediation so far into the background.
Rennie, I'll carry that even further and say that it is the philanthropy that makes the rest of the discussions so much easier. It's easier to engage your kids talking about what the shared passions are. And by the way, it has to be bidirectional. It has to be shared. You can't just say we're going to give all our money to Princeton. You know, that won't work, obviously. But that engagement and the ability and the examples and the history over months and years, decades of communicating about the philanthropy will improve your ability to communicate about the investment decisions and the distribution decisions and why this branch has got one issue and this other branch has a different issue. And it gives the cannon fodder, the material, if you will, to improve communications very broadly. And philanthropy is at the top of the chart for your ability, for in my experience, to get those discussions going, to establish the traditions of safe, open, and regular communications.
Thank you. George, do you have anything?
I'm going to pile on to that same topic, actually, because I think it's hard to overemphasize the sort of the teaching aspect of this. When we're talking about family dynamics, I think one of the commonalities of people in families with wealth is, what about the kids? And how do you teach them to live with wealth? How do you teach them to be stewards of wealth? How do you just teach them about finances and when it's going to be so important in the future? That comes up constantly. And philanthropy is often a phenomenal vehicle for doing that, where you can go through all of the principles of wealth and investment and dealing with intermediaries and all these things that sort of young adults need to learn at some point before they are given a chance to fully sort of grab the reins of the larger family wealth. So the teaching aspect and the family dynamics of those philanthropy conversations, I just want to additionally emphasize.
Thank you. And George, just following on from that, I mean, you're based in London, but dealing with US clients. Do you notice any difference culturally between US high net worth clients and UK clients in this space?
Yeah, there are a little bit. Some. It's always dangerous to generalize, obviously, but I think it is generally true that the concept of philanthropy is a little bit more endemic in sort of the U.S. cultural framework and certainly the U.S. wealth advisory framework than in the UK. It's growing here. We're doing more here, but there's simply both more tools. There's more legislation and support around that, and it's just sort of you grow up having a lemonade stand at the corner to raise money for your local church or charity, whatever it might be, and so forth. It's quite automatic, and of course there's a bit of a greater ease in the US about talking about money, both investment and philanthropy and so forth. So that greater permeation of the concept, the relative ease of the conversation, the more robust set of tools and laws around that means that it would be very common for the wealth advisory conversation to include a philanthropy aspect, much more so than is currently the case in the UK. But we're trying to change that.
Absolutely. And Rennie,
I wouldn't put it all on our being more advanced. My wife and I lived in London. Now I'm going on 30 years ago, I'm sorry to say, but I remember being struck by a number of traditions in England. I remember the red nose on the front of the car thing. There's some, and we all have, we have our Salvation Army bell ringers at Christmas, but other than that, you don't see it on the street very often. I felt you do more of that in England. So well done.
Okay, terrific. Rennie, just on this point of family dynamics, you mentioned obviously the long heritage in your family with the charitable structures that are already in place. Do you find if you're meeting someone with newly created wealth that's about to start a philanthropic journey, so like first gen, as it were, looking to set something up with their legacy in mind, is it a different style of conversation that you have with them, or what's your perspective on someone who's coming into a family with strong traditions of this versus a family with no tradition, but with the intention to start something with a long-term view?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. Probably the worst thing you can do with very established wealth is assume that what was done yesterday is what you should be doing tomorrow. And so that resetting and understanding what is money for, I think it's equally valid from a day one discussion of an entrepreneur that's had their liquidity event and they're looking to set up structures and work things out. It's the same for families that have been doing stuff over generations. That idea of philanthropy might be done, but the structure, what you're passionate about, what your children are passionate about, that can shift quite dramatically. And people that are bound and don't check back into what's important, quite often you have that engagement drop off from one generation to the next, and people don't want to become trustees, or they don't feel that there's a place for them at the table of discussing philanthropy. So I think both conversations, that really understanding what people right now want to achieve is fundamental.
But not assuming that all wealth is kind of already got all the answers. They need to refresh their thinking sometimes as well as the freshly minted wealth is quite an interesting point.
Yeah, let me carry this a little further, actually,
Please.
Rennie, because we do have this challenge here in the States of what might be called the original sort of donor intent of major gifts. And truthfully, that I think, in my view, those things have become the problems they have because the family didn't continue engagement well with their original gift. So David, you mentioned, and Rennie, you responded about maybe someone who's created new wealth and is setting up a new sort of philanthropic effort. Figuring out at that time how your family is going to continue to be engaged in that philanthropy, in that effort over not just the next couple of years, but over the next 20 to 50 years is critical. It's much easier to do it then than 10 years down the path when you suddenly realize things have gone askew or it's not what you want. So at that moment in the beginning is the perfect time, the best time to get that family engagement figured out, how it's going to be shared, the responsibility and the obligations and the opportunities of that philanthropy are going to be shared across the family, and family learns how to communicate well and sets up the traditions to do that.
So we've looked at there the dynamics within the family, but obviously all families sit within broader society. I'm just interested to get views from Rennie and Pierre on why it's important that wealthy families do engage with philanthropy. I mean, Rennie, do you find yourself in the position of having to actually be an advocate, talk directly to other families to encourage? Are they already thinking along those lines? The message of why it's important is well understood. What do you see of that discussion of the role of philanthropy within society?
I think there's a lot of it already happening. I see my role much more about sharing best practice rather than cajoling and getting people to do something that they haven't really considered before. And just explaining a little bit more about my role. So as head of philanthropy, I look at what we do as a family, so that 10% allocation that goes to the Golden Bottle Trust, but it also considers the organisation, and we have over half of our employees who are involved with Give As You Earn, and they're practitioners in philanthropy in their own right, which I think is incredibly powerful in having meaningful conversations about philanthropy and not just thinking, oh, it's for the family or it's for customers. And then, so in our customer base, there's also that sharing of best practice. People are amazing philanthropists in their own right, but it's how do you pick out those insights? How do you share them? How do you convene? And so I see my role less of saying you really should be doing philanthropy, and more your interest about philanthropy and how can I almost be a magpie, draw out those different bits of insight and bring them to bear. One thing that is quite interesting is one of the 7 partners will meet every single prospective customer. And the first thing we're holding in our mind is, are they like-minded? And that is the hurdle that has to be passed before you have any other type of discussion. A discussion about philanthropy, what are your passions? What are the things that you care about beyond yourself is a very, very good way of understanding, are people like-minded? And I'd say in those prospective customer meetings, it's 9 times out of 10 you will have a really engaging philanthropy discussion right off the bat.
Okay, thank you. Pierre, what's your perspective on that question, the role of philanthropy in society?
I think it's a critical tool that a wealthy family and a non-wealthy family, it makes no difference, can use and should use to project values and principles and wisdom and experiences to younger generations and beyond. And I think that can start when you're a little kid, and you know, maybe you have an allowance, or maybe you take your kids with you to do something. But if you have that allowance, part of the principle is, here's a portion of this which should be maybe saved for applying to some charitable endeavor, to be giving back, and that everyone should do it. And my mother's family has this wonderful example of everyone contributing to do it. There is many of the tens of thousands of employees in the business are not far above the minimum wage here in the States, and they are in that echelon of employees. They sometimes fall into hard times, and so the family, and then following the company, established a wonderful nonprofit whereby people can contribute a small amount of money and make that available to those who are in need within the employee base. And they made it available to the entire company through a simple pre-tax payroll deduction. That's turned out to be brilliant because everyone says, these are the people I'm working with. If he or she's having a hard time, maybe this nonprofit, maybe my gift can help a little bit. And that kind of message, then you can then play that back to your family. Is that everyone here, should be understanding of the people on the street they're passing, the people in school with them. And this is a tool. Philanthropy generally is a tool to communicate those kinds of values and principles. And it's very valuable for that.
Thank you. George, do you have something to add on that?
I was going to hijack your role, David, actually, because your question about the philanthropy role in society is interesting because there's been so much raised about how much philanthropy is valued, but philanthropists maybe not so much all the time. And given Pierre and Rennie's role, I don't know if that's something that they encounter or how they think about that. So I'm hijacking your role, David.
Oh, no, perfect. Far away, yeah. The role of philanthropist, Pierre, do you have a thought on that?
Say the question again. I'm not quite sure I get the nuance.
Essentially, there's a gap between the public appreciation for philanthropy and some discomfort with philanthropists themselves, especially the ultra wealthy philanthropists.
Right. I think that's a rollover from the discomfort with the ultra wealthy having unfair and inappropriate access and advantages and so on. And so I think that rubs off on their philanthropic endeavors, which of course do get maybe misused, those endeavors, to further the aims of the original donor. Sometimes, not often. I don't like to use those kind of broad brushes, but the reality is that does happen. And I think that's why sometimes society can look askance at the major philanthropic efforts and wondering, why are they really doing this? Do they really care about those starving people on the street, or are they doing it because it gets them some sort of political favor, which it does in some cases, and unfortunately it can be misused for that purpose.
Rennie, do you have a thought on that?
And I think there's an addition to that that's maybe a UK flavour, which is we're particularly poor at discussing wealth, money, all of those things, and a discussion about philanthropy, the giving, what you've done in terms of being a standard bearer philanthropist is a very close proxy for a discussion about wealth and money that you've made. I feel that we're far less comfortable doing that, and it does mean that there's a lot of philanthropy that happens in the UK who just don't have those signature people that stand up against it and represent it, which means that the convening that advisors can do behind the scenes of putting philanthropists together to discuss those topics and catalyse and make things happen is even more valuable, because using publicly available information, it's quite difficult to say, oh, of course, these are the three people you should absolutely speak to in this area.
Okay, thank you. And Zofia, we've got a question in the chat on YouTube that I wanted to bring you in on and get your perception on. A question from William Mendelowitz asking, should fundraisers be part of the advisory conversation? And second to that, in the arts, are younger generations of wealth holders looking for different sets of impacts needed? So I'm bringing you in on the fundraising side, Zofia, because I know that's part of your background, and it's interesting to see how you would see that fitting with the broader private wealth advisory piece.
I mean, it's a great question, and it's something that we also teach. So we do another training module that is not for professional advisors; it's for professional fundraisers from charities. And in that in that capacity, we teach them how to work with professional advisors. We teach them to understand how to view their donors as clients rather than bits of money that they can keep just tapping up every time they need to. It's understanding where they are expert and what that expert means in terms of the whole life cycle of a private client. So at what point do they need someone who is an expert in, say, mental health or homelessness? That's the point at which a fundraiser can be brought in as an expert in a cause that someone wants to make an impact in, rather than it being constantly being pitched. So we have these events that we put on, and we allow charities in the room. We invite them, we actively encourage them, because they bring with them the knowledge and the skills of what is out there, what is happening in the world, and other solutions for it. but we've had to very, very strictly be absolutely no pitching, because fundraisers have targets they need to meet. They are passionate about what they do. And so we just try to teach them how it is that the power that they have to really create some brilliant collaborations, brilliant kind of solutions to things, that if they come at it from a different angle, rather than it being shaking the bucket kind of fundraising that we mentioned earlier, it's more about collaborative partnerships.
I think one of the risks you have that the established charities, particularly the big ones, have is that the younger generations, with their ability to communicate continuously with lots of friends and their willingness to hear what those friends and their networks are saying, mean that the traditional charities don't look very attractive to them, don't look like where they want to be. And that is both the positive and the negative specifically for the established charities of this kind of multi-generational engagement and collaboration within the family, is that it will result in the elders being a little bit knocked off their tradition of giving. We always give our money to XYZ. We're going to keep doing that. As they get this sort of engagement with younger generations, they're going to be pulled a little bit differently into some newer things, some different things, which may not be really great yet. We don't know, but that's what you have to deal with. And I think that should be putting and is putting pressure on the more established nonprofits to evolve, to pay attention themselves to what the younger generations are going to want to do and want to say. And so that's the challenge that this kind of communication brings. And it's also the benefit that it brings is that you get more philanthropic engagement from the younger generations when they feel that what they care about, what their communities are talking about and are worried about, is being addressed.
I was just going to add from our perspective around the research that we've done through this kind of the great generational transfer of wealth. And we're seeing that there is a kind of purpose-driven wealth ideal coming through from we say millennials and driven by women of wealth, but I see it from a lot of people. To me, it's a new way of thinking about wealth generation that people are coming up with, and that we teach on a spectrum of philanthropic capital. So it's called the investment return continuum, and it goes from your traditional charitable giving, which is still important. It still has a place in our life. I mean, it's where most catalytic kind of change is allowed, because it's capital that is completely, you're not expecting a return at all on it other than the impact, all the way through to sort of venture philanthropy, and then the social investment, impact investing, ESG, and then the traditional kind of ways of negative screening. And we teach how advisors can go in and they can talk with their clients about where on that spectrum they're going to be. And that is going to help with the new generation of thinking, because it isn't just about traditional philanthropy. It's no longer is it philanthropy down here and investments over here and never the twain shall meet. They are intertwined, they are connected, and that is the only way we're going to solve these issues that the world is facing.
Thank you. George, was there another point to add on?
I was just going to pick up on both Pierre and now Zofia's points, because there's that last point Zofia was just making, there's an important conversion happening there, right? So the investment world has always been about sort of measuring returns and so forth. Philanthropy is increasingly adopting that, right? So we're looking at impact measurement. And of course, impact investing is all about that. It's just looking at multiple factors, financial returns and non-financial returns. What are you trying to achieve? And then how are we trying to measure those things? So we're getting an important conversion across that whole spectrum, Zofia was just talking around, where there's more and more commonality around seeking to measure and understand the impact of what you're doing. And I think that is an important point to this original question about the role of the fundraiser, because if the fundraiser thinks that their job is to just tug at your emotional heartstring and say, my thing is so important and look how important it is and how bad you feel if you don't solve it, well, that's pretty hard to differentiate from hundreds and hundreds of other things that are also really important and authentic, as well as things coming up like Ukraine now and so forth. That in some way isn't unique, right? That it's important and something should be solved. So the natural progression that fundraisers need to make in terms of really thinking in a more partnership way about this is an allocation of capital, this is the impact we're looking for it to achieve. That starts to dovetail with the rest of the advisory types of conversations that other advisors are having. That makes them a more natural partner with advisors in those conversations, as opposed to just trying to, do the hijack and try and, get a bucket in front of someone and say, fill it up. It's a very different type of engagement.
Rennie,
And of course, impact investing itself is sort of the outcome of that too. It's the combination of the investing and the philanthropy, which causes me to say, of course, as I have to from a regulated entity, that these are my words and not the words of my firm so much. But using impact investing as a way of bringing those two together is perfect, and that's how the world is evolving.
Okay, thanks. And Rennie, just your perspective on that, particularly on that second part of William's question, which was around, are younger generations of wealth holders looking for different impacts, looking to support in different ways, different causes, and how do families kind of navigate some of those discussions where there's just a difference of opinion over what they should be trying to, which causes they should be trying to support for what outcomes?
I think there are a few ways that you can cut that down and look at the differences. One of the fundamental things I think is that shift is that people are looking to bring to bear the full suite of their resources, and Zofia very, very expertly sort of laid out that continuum of capital from grant making all the way through to investment. I think when thinking about this next generation, they are looking at what's the full array of things that they can bring to bear, if they're a part of a family that own a business, can they recalibrate their business to be able to be much more impactful, much more purposeful? In their investments, can they direct it much more towards impact investments? In their grant making, are there things that they can do where it's not just an allocation of money, but can they use their advocacy on top? And I think this use of voice, use of convening, use of being able to use the full suite of levers is a very different way of approaching making a difference in their causes. And so if I was thinking about spinning it around, what can a fundraiser do about that? I think it's finding smaller groups of very, very engaged clients who are wanting to be involved with those charities, allowing them a voice, allowing them a degree of autonomy to control decisions, to be involved with some bits of decision making, helping to formulate bits of strategy. People really want to be involved with those causes, and thinking it beyond the transaction is fundamental.
And the younger generations have these networks, these social networks that they can bring to bear, and they will be greatly empowered by being given that opportunity to do it in a thoughtful way. And that again will cause a better longer term result if you allow your younger generations to use what they have, the assets they have, which may well be their social network, and bring that to bear in the way they need to do so.
Okay, thanks. And George touched on there the situation the dire situation in Ukraine being something that is on the spectrum. People are wanting to give philanthropic money into a whole variety of causes, looking at, supporting people in the Ukraine is one thing on one end of the spectrum that's motivating people, I guess, right now. And I know Philanthropy Impact ran a great session on that yesterday. I mean, perhaps Rennie, you could give us a few highlights from that as to what people can do if they're looking to support charities doing good work in that area right now.
The first thing I'd do is to point them towards the Philanthropy Impact website, which is being updated constantly as we're finding good charities that are making a difference. I think that idea, and one of the things that we did as an organisation, as Hoare's Bank, is we spoke to trusts, we spoke to foundations, we spoke to charities that we knew and trusted to try to work out who has the institutional capacity to dial up if they're given funds. And so that does mean right at the beginning, leaning towards these larger charities that can scale up very quickly is critical. However, one of the things that came out of the webinar yesterday was that there are still things that fall through the cracks. And so we talked a little bit about the amazing work that people have done in terms of getting medicine, getting very simple hygiene supplies out there. And recalibrating supply chains to be able to make sure that everything there is needed takes a bit of time. And so this isn't wasted effort. You need that immediate stuff that is money. You need that immediate stuff that is the provision of very, very basic healthcare tools. And then the next stage of it is, and this was the final bit that we discuss, is it will be a lattice work of different charities, of different organizations that need to work together to be able to come to the best solution. And so the role for advisors, for philanthropists, is to continue sharing information, pointing out where things are falling through the gaps, but also where are the shining lights that need extra resource to be able to continue delivering on their mission. So over the next period, we definitely need to focus on being as open and as helpful with the information that comes through our fingers.
Thank you. So first port of call, look for Philanthropy Impact's website. I mean, Zofia, do you have anything to add on to Rennie's comments on that in the situation in Ukraine?
Just to say that another thing that came out, so that we do this words of wisdom at the end, and the panel all seem to agree on one thing, and that is to trust those that have been doing it for a long, long time. So I think one of the areas in philanthropy and in all of the kind of doing good with your wealth, the idea of risk, the idea of trust, they're very, very at the forefront of decision making in this area. People are very risk averse in this sense, and that's what came out of that, is that organisations such as those that are in the Disaster Emergency Committee, there's 15 members, they are all well versed in dealing with humanitarian crises of war, the results of what's happening in war, and it's been happening across the globe for many, 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 many years, not just in Ukraine. And they know what to do, they know how to mobilise efforts, they know how to work with governments. They've been doing it for a long time. So it's that moment of being able to trust that they will do that what they need to with the money to really be impactful.
Thanks. And the question from Fiona Waite at RBC in Jersey. Thanks, Fiona, for this question. The COVID pandemic saw more funds being released by philanthropists faster and with less restrictions, in her opinion. Is this something that, as advisors, you're now bringing into the conversation? I think the question there is really, is COVID changing behaviours? Have people, having given money, are they looking afresh in a new way at giving more money? I mean,
Sure.
Pierre,
it's so clear that COVID changed so many things. This was it didn't become immediately apparent back in April and May 2 years ago that the impact upon philanthropy, but it's changed how we worked, changed how we interacted. It's changed indeed how one has to raise money if one is trying to further a philanthropic cause. So it is a part of the conversation, but I guess I'm not so sure I would use the word COVID is a part of the conversation, but merely the evolution of how one has to be prepared to engage with your donors, engage with your participants, your collaborators, and indeed, to the extent even possible, engage with the recipients of your effort. You know, remotely is and I think is actually a positive for philanthropies in the end, because the touch points become maybe not as deep in the sense of the handshake and the bear hug and so on, but can be more frequent and more convenient. And the ability to get a message across through doing that effectively is very important. So it does come up. Again, not for the word COVID so much, but the word this new style of interacting. You know, how do we bring that into? How can we use that to our benefit as a philanthropy, and how can we engage with our participants up and down across the spectrums, if you will, through Zoom and through virtual events and so on.
Thank you, Rennie. Do you have a perspective on how the pandemic changed behaviours and attitudes as well in this space?
So one of the lenses we saw it through was our donor advised fund. So in 2011, we were the first UK bank to set up a donor advised fund, and it now stands at 250 million. There's 115 customers that use it. But in the year and a half leading up to COVID, about £40 million was donated out of it. Since COVID hit, over £100 million has been donated out of it. So quantum, there was a huge upscaling in what people were giving to. In the UK, the 2011 Charities Act is one of the underpinning bits of legal framework, and in it there are 12 eligible areas of charitable activity. So to be a registered charity in the UK, you have to be touching at least one of these areas. And what we saw was that every single one of those 12 areas received more funds in the post-COVID giving than they did before. So it wasn't that people were substituting from one area to another and only giving to health. It was that people had stepped up all the way across the board, which I think was unsurprising. There was huge need, and having people identifying need, stepping in to prop up charities that they had enduring relationships with, as well as help with the instant responses, was absolutely fundamental. The one thing we were cautioning in it, or just making sure that donors thought about, was this is going to be a long process. So make sure that you have the funds ready to be able to help back in the build back stage, and that you can support those strategic initiatives that you've been supporting for a long time, and those funds are ready. And it's been heartening to see that there was a huge wave of money that went to making sure that charities didn't fall over when there was heightened need, but there's been that continued support, and people are helping now on their strategic pillars.
And I guess the great thing about the DAF is that they could be set up relatively quickly. You've got a transparent charging structure. It's not like a complex legal entity which needs, there is consideration there with the quantum going into the DAF, but it's not a complex concept, is it? Did you find that having this ready to discuss with families was something that could really help speed up larger donations and have a conduit to hold those funds while decisions are made as to who to benefit?
I think it's fascinating to see how the donor advised fund, in terms of something that people can use, can harness in the past decade, has evolved. It now is beginning to be a very standard bit of discussion of if you're thinking about charity, it isn't a requirement to set up a foundation or a trust. You can have all of the stuff that in your toolkit in terms of being able to do some really impactful giving, but you don't have to take a year setting it up. We've had a few instances where it's been a couple of days that we've set this up, and so the difference between a year and getting on and helping and a couple of days and getting on and helping is night and day, and I think is massively powerful, particularly where you're putting it against a backdrop of thinking about COVID responses, or thinking of a response to Ukraine, and how can you get on and start doing stuff right now?
Zofia, I mean, how do you see knowledge around the DAFs and different options for structuring with the advisor you're undertaking training with? Is it something that's now part of the common kind of parlance amongst advisors, of familiarity with the structure?
I think Pierre will be surprised to hear that it's not like it is in the UK, in the US. Here in the UK, there is still very little known about DAFs. There's still people who've never heard of them when they come to us, and that for me is shocking, and it's something we're trying to change. I mean, there are several debates around donor advised funds, and but from our perspective, it's a vehicle of giving that means it becomes easier for people to give at all different levels as well. It's not just the ultra wealthy. It's
interesting to hear you say that, Zofia, because indeed donor advised funds are used a lot. Are the U.S. style, which I'm sure is slightly different than the mechanics and structure and so on, but it's both easy, as you described, Rennie, to get it going. But it provides a tool that can be redirected quickly if need be, or that can help offset the ups and downs of your personal sort of economic production, the kind of money that you have available in a couple of years versus the money you want to spend a few years later. So we do a lot of donor advised fund work, if you will, with our clients. We help them do that all the time. And it does provide a great stabilizing and I think strengthening of their philanthropic, the success of their philanthropic endeavors.
Okay, great. And we're just coming towards the end of this session. So I'm just going to come to each of the panelists just for a little takeaway, a point from the session or an action point for someone, an advisor who's watching this, thinking about getting skilled up on this area, thinking about tabling questions. And
well, I'll jump right in there.
I'll
jump right in there, David, and I'll start with just a quick comment on your point, Rennie, about the sort of need to not really conserve, but be aware that there's going to be a recovery and a rebuilding part, maybe in the case of Ukraine, whatever, or something else. That right there is exactly the sort of tool that can get back to my sort of stick, which is establishing the traditions of communications that you need to have in your family, is to get that on the table on day one. Look, if we're going to give this money to this particular effort, what's the follow through that'll be required? Let's figure that. Let's talk about that now, so that we are prepared 5 years from now, well, 1 year from now, even to redouble our efforts, that we've laid it out in the right fashion. So I would come back as a summary, David, and just say that it's all about getting that communication going within your family. Don't make standalone decisions. Use the philanthropy, your philanthropic efforts, as a tool to increase the bonds within your family and increase the sort of cross collaboration benefits that you will create, both older to younger and younger to older, but also within cousins, if you will, or peers, and you'll be much more effective both in your philanthropic giving and the impact of it, and then in the cohesion of your family across time.
Perfect, thank you. Rennie, any closing thoughts as we wrap up this discussion?
I think probably two things. So one is possibly the way we presented philanthropy here today. It seems like an activity of perfection, that to do it you have to be highly skilled, and there's no other way to do it. I wouldn't want to dissuade people from just getting involved. Taking that first step and getting involved with philanthropy is the huge breaker. And once you're in there, there's a massive amount that you will learn. I think the other side I'd point out is that inside that impact investment world, the philanthropy world, people are incredibly generous with their time. So if you're wanting to find out more, plug into that network, plug into people who are in the philanthropy world, and you'll be incredibly surprised at how willing people are to help you get up to speed, triangulate what's going on, and navigate the next steps. So yes, it's a call to get on and do things and find others that can help you on your way.
Wonderful, great. And Zofia, any closing comments from you, thoughts? What should people be doing?
Well, there's a stat that Rennie gave you at the beginning before we came live, which is that individuals being given advice by someone who's knowledgeable in philanthropy are likely to give 17 times more. And that's huge. That's a huge amount of money. And I think that if professional advisors were aware that they have that power, that actually not only would it increase their client service, it would increase their client retention, all of those wonderful commercially reasons that they could do it impactfully, they have the power to really make change within this world. And so the action I'm saying here is to come to Philanthropy Impact, connect with me on LinkedIn, email me, come and find out what it is that we can offer you and your firm. We do lots of different ways that we can work with you on just being able to uplift this, upskill your team, any of these things, that to actually just start to bring philanthropy and impact investing conversations, values-based conversations to your clients. We can help. It doesn't have to cost a great deal. We've got a lot of free resources, so come and talk to us.
Terrific. Well, yeah, the message there, get involved. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a terrific discussion. Thank you to Pierre, Rennie, Zofia, and of course, George, for their insight on this session. Do check out Philanthropy Impact's website. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you for your questions and comments, and I wish you a very good day.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.